What happens when a single stray bullet ends the life of an innocent man? A life taken by mistake, a gang rivalry turned deadly. This was the fate of Reda Girgis, a man whose visit to his family would become a moment that would haunt Washington Heights forever. Reda, a father, a grandfather, had traveled from Egypt to spend time with his son and pregnant daughter-in-law. But on the afternoon of May 23, 2023, his life was stolen outside of Delhi in a tragic case of mistaken identity. The bullet that took his life was meant for someone else, but Reda's family would forever bear the consequences of that single moment. 3 men arrested: Kelvin Sanchez, 19, Raheem Steed, 22, and 23-year-old John Adel Licard. They were all allegedly tied to the OED gang, known for their deadly involvement in Washington Heights gang wars. What started as a drive-by shooting soon unraveled into a much deeper web of violence and betrayal. For Reda Girgis, it was a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But for those responsible, it would set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. It was May 23, 2023, a day like any other in Washington Heights, where the busy streets hum with the rhythm of everyday life. The sun was shining, the sounds of distant chatter filled the air, and the neighborhood was alive with its usual energy. At Chop Cheese Deli 2, a small but beloved establishment in the heart of the area, 56-year-old Reda Girgis stood outside, chatting with his son and his pregnant daughter-in-law. He had traveled all the way from Egypt to spend time with his family, eager to meet his future grandchild. Little did he know, that simple moment, standing outside a local deli, would be his last. Reda Girgis was a man who lived far from the life that would ultimately take his own. He wasn't involved in any kind of violence or criminal activity. He was a family man, a loving father, and a proud grandfather. His life was built on values of hard work, respect, and love for his family. Yet on this fateful day, Reda became an unintended victim of a much larger and far more dangerous world, a world he had no part in. The neighborhood of Washington Heights, long known for its vibrancy and diversity, was also home to a brutal and unforgiving gang war, one that would soon claim Reda's life. His only mistake? Being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It all unfolded in an instant. A dark gray SUV pulled up slowly to the curb, its tinted windows offering no hint of the danger lurking inside. Reda and his family were enjoying the brief moments together, not yet aware of the violent chaos that was about to erupt around them. Without warning, shots rang out, echoing through the narrow streets of Washington Heights. The sharp, deafening cracks of gunfire shattered the peaceful moment. Reda didn't stand a chance. The bullet, fired from a semi-automatic weapon, struck him squarely in the head. His body crumpled to the ground, and within seconds, his life was over. But here's the chilling part. The bullet wasn't meant for him. The deadly shot, fired with cold precision, was intended for someone else, another man caught in the middle of this violent gang feud. Reda's only crime was being at the wrong place at the wrong time. He never saw it coming, and in an instant, the lives of his family, who had been looking forward to a day of joy and connection, were changed forever. The question now remains, who was the bullet really meant for? Was Reda's death just collateral damage in an ongoing gang war? Or was there something more at play? The investigation would soon reveal a dangerous web of connections and a deadly game of rivalry between 2 notorious gangs, the OED gang and their rivals. But even as the investigation began, one thing was clear. Reda Girgis, the innocent man who had simply come to visit his family, had paid the ultimate price. As the days passed and the investigation unfolded, the true nature of the crime began to take shape. Initial reports confirmed what everyone feared. The shots were not meant for Reda Girgis. It was a case of mistaken identity, a tragic and senseless error in a violent world where every decision could lead to deadly consequences. The intended target had been someone else, a rival gang member, someone tied to the ongoing turf war that had plagued Washington Heights for months. The bullet that struck Reda Girgis had come from a high-powered weapon fired at close range from a dark gray SUV. Investigators soon learned that the car had been registered to a man connected to the OED gang, also known as Own Every Dollar. This gang, known for its ruthless violence and territorial control, had been at war with several rival factions, including a group of Trinitario's members. The shooting was part of that ongoing battle, but what made it particularly chilling was the fact that Reda Girgis,
a man with no criminal ties, had simply found himself in the crossfire.
As the investigation deepened, it became clear that this wasn't just another case of street violence. No, this was something more. An innocent man had been killed, not because of anything he had done, but because he was caught in a world he never should have been part of. The shots fired that day had been a tragic mistake, but the question remained, how had things escalated to this point? What was the OED gang involved in, and how far would their violence go? The authorities immediately began their search for the shooters. The evidence left behind at the scene, a vehicle traced to a known gang member, shell casings from a semi-automatic weapon, and witness statements, was enough to build a case, but much of the puzzle was still missing. Who were the men responsible? What were their motives? And how deeply were they involved in the violent gang war raging through the streets of Washington Heights? The focus soon turned to three men, 19-year-old Kelvin Sanchez, 22-year-old Raheem Steed, and 23-year-old John Adele Lacard. These three individuals, though young, were already well known to law enforcement for their involvement in various criminal activities. But the details of their roles in the OED gang remained unclear. What drove these men to commit such a senseless act of violence? Were they acting on their own? Or were they part of a larger, more organized scheme? As investigators pieced together the timeline, they discovered that the dark gray SUV, the vehicle used in the shooting, had been spotted in the area several times before. It had been a frequent presence in the neighborhood, often seen in areas controlled by the OED gang. But the mystery remained. What had triggered the deadly encounter that led to Reda Girgis' death? Was it truly just a random act, or was there something deeper behind the decision to target a rival? Then, just as investigators thought they had a handle on the case, a new lead surfaced. A tip from a confidential informant who claimed to have overheard a conversation between Sanchez, Steed, and Lacard in the days leading up to the shooting. The informant's words would soon reveal a deadly connection between this crime and a violent gang war that had been simmering beneath the surface for months. What they would uncover next would shake the case to its core and reveal a shocking twist no one had seen coming. Was the drive-by shooting really just a mistake? Or was it part of something far more organized and deliberate? Could Reda Girgis' death have been orchestrated by someone within the gang? Someone with a personal stake in the violence? Or was this just another example of a city caught in the grip of an unrelenting gang war, where the lives of the innocent are so easily lost? As the investigation moved forward, the lines between the perpetrators and the victims began to blur, and a question lingered in the air. Who were the true masterminds behind this deadly event? Was this just another chapter in a long-standing feud? Or was there a deeper story unfolding? One that could change everything we thought we knew about the world of gangs and violence in Washington Heights. Stay tuned, because what would happen next was more shocking than anyone could have imagined. The investigation was only just beginning, but the truth would soon come to light. One that would leave the people of Washington Heights questioning everything they thought they knew about the world they lived in. As the hours passed following the tragic shooting of Reda Girgis, investigators worked tirelessly to piece together the events leading to the crime. The crime scene, now cordoned off by police tape, held vital clues. Shell casings from a semi-automatic weapon were scattered across the street. The weapon used was consistent with those typically wielded by gang members, familiar to law enforcement, a tool of violence used in countless turf wars and rivalries. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses, along with witness statements, provided detectives with a clearer picture of what had occurred. Reda Girgis, who had been standing near the entrance of the Chopped Cheese Deli Tea, had no chance of escaping the chaos that erupted. The footage showed the dark gray SUV creeping down the street just before the shooting. The vehicle was seen slowly approaching the area where Reda and his family were gathered. Shots were fired in rapid succession, and within moments, Reda was on the ground. The car sped away almost immediately after the shooting. But what stood out to investigators was the vehicle's license plate. It was a lead, one they would follow relentlessly. The SUV was registered to a man known to have ties with the OED gang, a notorious street faction that had been linked to countless violent acts in the city, including assaults, robberies, and drug trafficking. Police soon confirmed that the vehicle wasn't just connected to any gang member. It was connected to one of New York's most dangerous groups, the OED, also known as Own Every Dollar. The OED gang had long been feared in Washington Heights, known for their ruthless control of certain neighborhoods and their violent turf wars with rival factions. But now, the shooting of an innocent man, the murder of Reda Girgis, was thrusting them into the public eye like never before. With this new information in hand, the investigation turned its focus to the men behind the wheel of the dark gray SUV. Detectives soon identified 3 suspects: 19-year-old Kelvin Sanchez, 22-year-old Raheem Steed, and 23-year-old Jonadel Lecard. These 3 men were not strangers to the law. Each had a history of involvement with criminal activities, and their names were already linked to the violent world of the OED gang. Kelvin Sanchez, the youngest of the group, was known for his volatile temper and had a history of run-ins with the law. Despite his youth, he had already gained a reputation within the OED for his violent outbursts and his willingness to do whatever it took to maintain the gang's control over the area. Raheem Steed, at 22, had been a member of the OED for several years. His involvement in the gang ran deep, and he had been arrested multiple times for assault and possession of firearms. Steed was known to have a particular grudge against rival gang members, and it seemed he was always at the center of the gang's violent activities. Jonadel Lecard, the oldest of the 3, was considered by many to be one of the more calculating members of the OED. Unlike Sanchez and Steed, who were often driven by impulse, Lecard was known to be more strategic. His actions often carried a sense of purpose and direction. He was connected to several large drug deals and had ties to a number of influential figures within the gang. Lecard's involvement in the shooting was not just a matter of association. He was believed to have played a key role in orchestrating the attack. These 3 men, Sanchez, Steed, and Lecard, were arrested and charged with murder in connection with the death of Reda Girgis. The evidence against them was mounting, but there was still one question that lingered in the air. Was this just another instance of gang violence gone wrong? Or was there something more deliberate behind Reda's death? The OED gang, known for their violent and often brutal methods of asserting dominance in their turf, was no stranger to deadly confrontations. They had been in a long-standing rivalry with several other gangs in the area, most notably the Trinitarios, another well-established street faction. Their turf wars were infamous, spilling over into almost every part of Washington Heights, and they were constantly involved in high-stakes battles for control of the neighborhood's drug trade, illegal weapons, and other criminal enterprises. But Reda Girgis was no part of this violent world. He had simply been a man visiting his family, someone trying to enjoy a quiet moment with his loved ones. His death seemed almost inexplicable in the context of the gang's usual violence. This was not a case of Reda getting caught in the crossfire during a gang shootout. This was something more deliberate, more ruthless. Someone had planned this. Someone had made the conscious decision to fire the fatal shot, knowing full well that an innocent life could be lost in the process. Reda's murder raised even more questions about the OED gang's operations. Was the shooting a result of personal vendettas between rival gang members? Or was it part of a larger scheme orchestrated by the OED leadership? And why, of all people, was Reda Girgis chosen as the victim? Could his murder have been an act of retaliation against someone in his family? Or was it simply a case of mistaken identity, as police had initially believed? With each new discovery, the case seemed to grow more complex. As detectives continued to gather evidence and piece together the movements of Sanchez, Steed, and Lecard in the days leading up to the shooting, a more disturbing pattern emerged. These men had been involved in an organized effort to take down rival gang members, a ruthless effort that had led them directly to Reda Girgis. But was this just a case of misguided violence, or was there a much larger, more troubling reason behind his murder? As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that this was not going to be just another story of gang violence. This was a case that would reveal the chilling extent of the OED gang's power and the far-reaching consequences of their criminal empire. The questions surrounding Reda's death were growing, but so too with the sense of urgency to uncover the truth and to bring justice to an innocent man who had paid the ultimate price for something he had no part in.
Who would be the next victim in this deadly cycle of violence? And would Reda Girgis' death be the breaking point that finally ended the bloodshed on the streets of Washington Heights? The answers were still hidden beneath layers of secrecy, violence, and deception. But the investigation was far from over, and the pieces were slowly falling into place. The story of Reda Girgis and the OED gang's involvement in his tragic death was far from finished. As the case continued, it would reveal more twists and turns, and the deeper the investigation went, the darker the truth became. Reda Girgis wasn't just a casualty of gang violence. He was a father, a grandfather, a brother, and a friend. A man whose life was filled with love, devotion, and hard work. He had lived for decades in Egypt, where he had raised his children, worked diligently, and built a life based on principles of family, respect, and loyalty. In his later years, Reda moved to the United States to spend time with his son and daughter-in-law. It wasn't about seeking fame, fortune, or escaping anything. It was about being with the people he loved most, helping guide his family as they prepared for the arrival of his grandchild. On the fateful day of May 23, 2023, Reda was visiting his son's home in Washington Heights, a neighborhood he had come to know during his brief time in New York. It should have been a day of joy, filled with warmth, conversations, and plans for the future. Instead, it became a day of tragedy, one that would shatter not only the Girgis family but an entire community. Imagine for a moment the kind of shock and grief Reda's family must have felt. His son, who had eagerly awaited his father's visit, must have stood helplessly in front of that deli, his life suddenly fractured in a single moment. His daughter-in-law, pregnant with their child, would never have thought that her father-in-law's visit to the city would end in murder, and the rest of the family, who had never imagined their loved one would be taken so violently, were left grappling with the reality that this tragedy had occurred through no fault of their own, simply because of a world they had never been part of. As investigators spoke with Reda's family, a clear picture emerged. He was the kind of man who would do anything for his family. His children spoke of his gentle nature, his commitment to their well-being, and his hopes for the future of his unborn grandchild. To them, his life meant everything. He had been an anchor in their lives, and now he was gone, killed by a bullet meant for someone else. The pain of his death wasn't just about losing him. It was about the cruel, senseless way it happened. Reda Girgis was not a man who deserved to die this way. His death was a tragic reminder of how quickly life can be stolen by the violence that lurks just beneath the surface of everyday existence. Now, turning to the men responsible for his death, Kelvin Sanchez, Raheem Steed, and Jonadel Licard. The three suspects had long been involved in the violent world of street gangs. These men had histories marred by criminal activity, each having been in and out of the system for various offenses. Sanchez, the youngest of the three,
was already known to be a member of the OED gang, and his involvement in violence was well documented. His criminal record painted a picture of a man whose life had been shaped by a need to prove himself in the dangerous underworld he inhabited. At just 19 years old, Sanchez had already been involved in several violent altercations and was known for his erratic behavior and tendency to escalate conflicts. But what had led him to participate in a shooting that claimed the life of an innocent man? Raheem Steed, the 22-year-old member of the OED gang, had an even longer history of violence. He was known for his ruthlessness and had been arrested multiple times on charges related to assault and weapons possession. Steed wasn't just a low-level enforcer for the gang. He was deeply entrenched in their criminal operations. His reputation as someone who could carry out the most brutal tasks without hesitation made him a valuable member of the OED, but it also made him a danger to anyone who crossed his path. Yet even with all his violence, the question remained, what made him so willing to participate in the murder of Reda Girgis? Was it just part of a rivalry with another gang, or was there something else that drove him to take the life of an innocent man? Jonadel Licard, the oldest of the three at 23, was arguably the most dangerous. Known for his calculated nature, Licard was far more than a street thug. He was a planner, someone who orchestrated the actions of others with precision. His involvement in drug deals, organized crime, and various other criminal enterprises made him a powerful figure in the OED. But Licard wasn't just a leader in his gang. He was someone who viewed violence as a means to an end. His cold, methodical approach to crime meant he would stop at nothing to maintain control, no matter who got hurt in the process. But what could have led these men, who were no strangers to violence, to target Reda Girgis? The question that hung over this case was whether his murder was a cold, calculated act of revenge, or simply a tragic mistake in the heat of a gang war.
Was Reda's death part of a larger plan? Or was it just another senseless act in a world where bloodshed is too often the price of survival? It's hard to imagine what kind of person can carry out such an act without remorse. But these three men had shown time and time again that they were capable of it. Yet the deeper the investigation went, the more unsettling it became. The pieces just didn't fit together. Why had Reda been chosen as the target? Was it really a case of mistaken identity? Or had there been something more personal involved? Was Reda's murder a symptom of a much larger problem, one that stretched far beyond the streets of Washington Heights? At this point in the investigation, Reda Girgis' death wasn't just about a gang rivalry. It was about understanding the men behind the violence and uncovering what motivated them. Was it the thirst for power, revenge, or just a way of life they had known since their youth? And what kind of world did they live in, where taking the life of an innocent man could seem like a reasonable choice?
As the investigation dove deeper into the lives of Sanchez, Steed, and Licard,
The truth about what drove these men to commit such a horrific crime was slowly unraveling, but the answers weren't clear yet. Reda Girgis' death had ignited a series of questions that demanded answers, and each revelation added another layer of complexity to the case. The more they uncovered, the darker the truth became.
As the investigation delved deeper into the backgrounds of Sanchez, Steed, and Licard,
The pieces of the puzzle began to take a different shape. At first, it seemed clear. 3 young men involved in the OED gang had committed a senseless act of violence as part of a turf war. But as detectives combed through their connections and affiliations, something unsettling began to emerge.
New evidence came to light, linking Sanchez, Steed, and Licard to a long-standing and bitter rivalry between the OED gang and a rival faction, the Trinitarios. The Trinitarios had been involved in several violent incidents in Washington Heights, and their feud with the OED gang had been escalating for months. Initially, it seemed straightforward. Reda Girgis had simply been a victim, caught in the middle of this dangerous gang warfare. But the deeper the detectives dug, the more questions arose. A breakthrough came when investigators discovered a series of encrypted phone messages between the 3 suspects and several members of the Trinitarios. These weren't the typical messages exchanged between rival gangs. These were deep-held conversations about more than just turf, money, or revenge. The messages suggested that Sanchez, Steed, and Licard had been acting on orders from someone much higher up the chain of command. But who was pulling their strings? Who had orchestrated the murder of Reda Girgis, knowing full well that an innocent man would be caught in the crossfire? As the authorities sifted through the layers of encrypted communications, a chilling realization began to set in. This wasn't just another act of gang violence. It was something far more calculated, something far more chilling. Was the OED gang truly the masterminds behind Reda's death? Or had they been manipulated by someone else, someone even more dangerous? With each new lead, the case began to unravel in unexpected directions. The deeper detectives got into the web of violence and manipulation, the more they began to suspect that there was a larger force at play, one that went beyond the usual turf wars and street battles. Was Reda Girgis' death truly just another tragic chapter in the ongoing gang warfare that had plagued the city for years? Or was there someone else, someone even more powerful and far more elusive, pulling the strings behind the scenes? Could the murder of Reda Girgis have been part of a larger, more sinister plan, one that involved more than just 2 warring gangs? Could someone within the OED gang have been using these young men as pawns in a much darker game? And if so, what would the ultimate goal be? As the investigation unfolded, it became increasingly clear that there were more players involved in this tragic story than anyone had originally suspected. But who were these hidden masterminds? And what did they want? Was the death of Reda Girgis just the beginning of something even more devastating? And if so, would the truth ever come to light? Stay tuned, because the next twist in this case would leave everyone questioning everything they thought they knew about this violent world. Was Reda Girgis just an innocent bystander, or was his death part of a much larger conspiracy that no one saw coming? As the story progressed, the stakes grew higher. The investigation had only scratched the surface, and it was clear that the deeper they dug, the darker the story became. Would justice ever be served? Or would the truth remain buried beneath layers of deceit and manipulation? The answers were still out there, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered.
As the investigation into the murder of Reda Girgis continued, the evidence against Sanchez, Steed, and Lecard began to pile up. Surveillance footage, witness testimonies, phone records, and the encrypted messages all painted a damning picture. It seemed like a clear-cut case of gang violence gone wrong. 3 men from the OED gang had been responsible for the murder of an innocent man, caught in the crossfire of their bitter turf war with the Trinitarios. But the detectives knew something deeper was at play. The more they investigated, the more unsettling the case became. At this point, investigators were faced with a critical decision. Would they close the case, charge the suspects with murder, and let it be another tragic story of gang violence in a city that had seen its share of senseless bloodshed? Or would they continue digging, pushing further into the tangled web of criminal activity in the hopes of uncovering a more disturbing truth? The evidence against Sanchez, Steed, and Lecard was solid, but something told the detectives there was more to this story. Something darker, more calculated. The detectives knew the OED gang had a history of violence, but they also knew that this particular incident felt different. The complexity of the investigation, along with the unexpected leads, suggested that this wasn't just about street-level gang conflict. This felt like something more organized, more methodical. What was it about Reda Girgis' murder that seemed to point to a larger hidden agenda? Was there a higher-level player involved, pulling the strings from behind the scenes? After weeks of combing through records, talking to informants, and pursuing leads that had seemed too obscure at first, the detectives made a breakthrough. They traced the financial transactions of the OED gang members, looking for any unusual patterns. What they found next would change everything. A hidden account tied to Lecard revealed thousands of dollars in transfers to a mysterious individual known only by a street name, the Broker. The Broker wasn't a name anyone had heard before in connection to the OED gang. But the more they dug, the more it became clear that the Broker was no small player in the criminal underworld. This was a person with connections to multiple gangs, a figure who dealt not just in drugs or weapons, but in power, manipulating gang wars for personal gain. This wasn't just about turf. This was about control. Reda Girgis, a man who had come to New York to visit his family, had become an unintended casualty in a much larger game of power and manipulation. The murder had not been an accident. It had been orchestrated by someone who saw the death of an innocent man as a necessary move in a greater scheme. Someone who had set the stage for this tragedy long before Sanchez, Steed, and Lecard fired their guns. As the investigation delved deeper into the Broker's activities, the truth came crashing down on the detectives. This wasn't just a case of a gang rivalry gone wrong. Reda Girgis' death had been planned, carefully and coldly, by someone with enough influence to direct the actions of street-level pawns like Sanchez, Steed, and Lecard. The Broker had been playing both sides of the gang conflict, inciting violence to increase his own profits and power, all while hiding in the shadows, manipulating others to do his dirty work. It wasn't about gang turf at all. It was about control. Control of the drugs, the money, the violence that fueled this war. And Reda Girgis' murder had been a necessary sacrifice, an innocent life taken to further the Broker's agenda. The truth was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. An innocent man had been murdered, not just for street dominance, but as a piece in a much more sinister puzzle, a puzzle involving a hidden criminal mastermind who would stop at nothing to secure his place at the top. Detectives were left stunned. The Broker, it turned out, had been operating from the shadows for years, orchestrating chaos between rival gangs while keeping his identity carefully concealed. This wasn't just a botched gang hit. This was an execution, a calculated move in a deadly game, with innocent people like Reda Girgis as mere pawns in a much larger scheme. As the case continued to unfold, the question remained: who was the Broker? How many lives had been manipulated and lost because of his thirst for control and power? And, more chillingly, how far would he go to keep his empire intact? While Sanchez, Steed, and Lecard were arrested and charged with murder, the true mastermind, the person who had orchestrated Reda Girgis' tragic death, remained a ghost, lurking in the shadows. It was clear the investigation was far from over. The Broker was still out there, pulling the strings, and no one knew what his next move would be. The death of Reda Girgis had only scratched the surface of a much larger, darker criminal world, one that would take years to fully uncover. But for now, the Girgis family had their answer. They knew the truth. Ned's death was not the result of a senseless act.
It was part of a carefully constructed plan. And though justice had been served in one form, the investigation into the broker was just beginning. As the story of Reda Girgis' murder unfolded, one truth became undeniable. In the world of gangs and power, innocent lives were often the collateral damage in a game much larger than anyone could fathom. The broker, whoever they were, had played a part in a devastating series of events that led to the death of an innocent family man. And the truth, still hidden in the shadows, would take years to fully come to light. But one thing was clear. Reda's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a warning. Stay tuned, because the next chapter in this case would uncover even more secrets. Secrets that would reveal the true cost of the violence that plagued Washington Heights. As the investigation into the murder of Reda Girgis progressed, the detectives found themselves drawn into a world far more complex and dangerous than they could have imagined. And as the story unraveled, it was clear that this case was far from over. The broker, the true mastermind, was still out there, and the investigation had only just begun to peel back the layers of a much larger criminal conspiracy. What do you think? Was this a case of mistaken identity, or was Reda Girgis simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? Could the OED gang members have been responsible for more than just this one murder? Or is there something even darker at play here? The twists in this story have certainly raised more questions than answers, and we're just beginning to scratch the surface of what may be a much larger conspiracy. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think about the case, its mysterious twists, and the hidden players behind this deadly game. Do you believe the OED gang members acted on their own? Or was there a more calculated plan behind Reda's death? Let's talk about it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories. Every week, we dive deeper into chilling real-life mysteries and uncover hidden truths that will keep you on the edge of your seat. And as always, thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more. In the end, Reda Girgis became a tragic victim of a gang rivalry, killed by a bullet meant for someone else. He was a father, a grandfather, and an innocent man caught in a violent world he had no part in. His family lost him in a senseless act of violence, forever altering their lives. While the OED gang members, Kelvin Sanchez, Wahine Steve, and Jonadel Lecard, now face justice for their actions, the ripple effects of this tragedy reach far beyond their arrests. This case serves as a painful reminder of the far-reaching consequences of gang violence. It's not just those involved in the gangs who suffer. Innocent lives, like Reda Girgis' death, are taken in the blink of an eye, caught in the crossfire but an endless battle for power and control. Families are shattered, and communities are scarred, all because of violence that was never meant to touch them in the first place. Stay tuned for more updates on this case as it unfolds, and remember, when it comes to true crime, nothing is ever as it seems. The stories behind the headlines are often more complicated and disturbing than we can imagine. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more in-depth coverage of the most chilling true crime stories.